Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial Educational Center. And I want to make one point. You know, we are the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial Educational Center, and we're also known as the Shabazz Center. So when you hear the Shabazz Center, it's the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty. When you hear Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz, it's the Shabazz Center. All right? So first of all, it's a great honor to host this wonderful event, Diasporic Consciousness, Black Identity, and the Present Memory of Cuban Racism. This is the second major scholarly symposium that we've had here in the last 2 years. Last year, if you remember, we did a fantastic event on Frantz Fanon, celebrating 50 years of his masterpiece, The Wretched of the Earth. And in that event, we had both his daughter, Marie Fanon, and our very own Malak Shabazz, Dr. Betty Shabazz and Malcolm X's daughter, and also Steve Biko's son. So that was a very special event, and this is the second one, and we're very proud to put one of these on every year. And before I get going, one of our board members, who's my employer, but much more than that, Malak Shabazz, please stand up. She is the daughter of Malcolm X. She's got a bad throat, she says, so she's not going to say anything. But you can talk to her later. For me, my name is Mark Harding, and I'm the Interim Executive Director. And it's, again, a great pleasure to see you here today, especially considering the difficult times we've been facing. I think we should spend just a moment thinking about all those folks who had to deal with death, destruction, and devastation of lives, not just in the tri-state area, but also in Cuba, in Jamaica, in Haiti, in the Dominican Republic, and the Bahamas. So just a moment of thought for those, please. Okay, good. I would like to recognize a number of organizations who've done great work for us in helping get the word out and partnering with the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz, Norfolk State University, the Griffith Arts Center. I'd like to, a big shout out to the Afro-Latino Forum. To the Afro-Cuban website. Casadetas Americas. The July 26 Coalition. And a special shout always to Pathfinder Books. We have a special relationship with them because, of course, they publish all of Brother Malcolm's speeches. So this is a truly important resource that represents Malcolm, his words. And I want to just deal with that for a second, because the reason you're in this very special place is because El Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X, used to come and speak in this very space, right over here. And he spoke here on at least 18 occasions in the last year of his life between March of 1964 and that fateful Sunday on the 21st of February 1961. He spoke here on 18 occasions. And all his developments in that period of time, he would come and would speak on a Sunday afternoon between 500 and 1,000 people. And his organization, African American Unity, was founded here. Muslim Mosque Incorporated was founded here. So this is a very, very special place. And again, it's a memorial space because on the 21st of February 1965, about 2 o'clock, he was about to get up and make a speech to let the world know about the program of the organization Afro-American Unity, and he was gunned down right over here. So you were in a very, very special place, but more importantly, this is a place where we go from. We don't dwell just in that, we move forward on his strength, on his ideas, on his mind, on his growth, and that's why we're here today. And I want to recognize, as he would, this moment. We know about Hurricane Sandy, but of course, for the last 5 years, we've been dealing with a hurricane of our own for everybody, the meltdown of the global economy. And which is why we're in this predicament right now, where we're on the precipice every day, not just in this country, but all over the world. Every country, every people dealing with this in a different way. And of course, we can't move on without talking about the next couple of days, there's going to be a presidential election, and election of the Senate and the Congress. And we're dealing with one person who represents all the forces that have led us to this precipice, and another person, the sitting president, who is trying to hold a position. And I think I speak for many of us when we would like him to draw a line in the sand and say, we, the 99%, are not going to go back, we're going to go forward. And I say this because Brother Malcolm was always about dealing with where we stand in this very moment in time. What are the forces that have brought us there and how we can get out? With regard to this question we're going to deal with, the race question in Cuba and the history of Cuba, I just took one quote from him. In January of 1965, in an interview with the Village Voice, he was asked questions about the issues of race. And Malcolm said, you have to wake people up first, then you get action. And the question, the interview said, to their own exploitation. And he said, no, to their humanity, their own worth, and their own heritage. All right, I think we're going to talk about this whole issue right now. And I want to mention two other great people in my life who I take seriously. The first is the great historian and journalist and scholar C.L.R. James, who came from Trinidad. And C.L.R. comes from a different but very interesting position. And he wrote this fabulous book called The Black Jacobins, about the Haitian Revolution. And on page 283 of the 1963 edition, I want to quote 2 sentences. Quote, the race question is subsidiary to the class question in politics, and to think of imperialism in terms of race is disastrous. But to neglect the racial factor as merely incidental is an error only less grave than to make it fundamental. And the last quote is from the great Bob Marley, from the song, Redemption Song, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, none but ourselves can free our mind. Now, I want to introduce the person who's brought this here, Professor Jeff Delfacard. He's going to come up in a second. I just want to say that Jeff and I have known each other for many years. We were grad school together. We studied history together then. We studied history together every day we were talking. And he's very special because he's always said, we've never done anything together. He said, we haven't written anything together yet. So for me to host him here is a great thing. His daughter, Sonia, is right over there. I remember when she was born. His son is my godson. It's a very special relationship. So I'm going to introduce him, bring him up in a second. But before that, just one announcement from Sophia. Do you want to say something? We're going to have another announcement later, but she has something to say about an event this evening.
First of all, I really want to say thank you for allowing me to make this announcement. We're having a very special event following this, and it's an opportunity for all of our Cuban guests and all of you to join us. It's called Freedom Dance, and it's a concept that was conceived of actually by Assata Shakur several years ago as a way to bring activists and progressive people together to do a celebration, not only of her liberation, but of life and the fact that we continue to struggle in a very difficult imperialist system. And so her idea was to bring everybody together to dance, play music, and just enjoy themselves. It's not a talking heads event. So it's going to be at the National Black Theater this evening from 8 to midnight. That is on 5th Avenue between 125th Street and 126th. And all of the proceeds, and this was Assata's wish, all of the proceeds go to political prisoners here in the United States to support those comrades who put their lives on the line to fight for our independence and for our self-determination. So again, that's Freedom Dance this evening from 8 to 12 at the National Black Theater on 5th Avenue between 125th and 126th Street. Please come join us. It's $20, goes to a good cause. Thank you.
One other announcement I want to make. We talked about the presidential election, but we actually have a vice presidential candidate in the House. Mara DeLuca, would you please stand up? You're our first vice presidential candidate who's ever been in this place, so you're very special. Maybe you can talk later on, okay? And without further ado, Professor DeLuca.
This is one of the most special moments in my life. Obviously, thank you very much. for the invitation to use this amazing space where historical memory resonates. I have to say, a lot has gone into preparing for this event, and we're going to talk about a difficult subject, a struggle within the struggle, which is race and racism in Cuba. We're going to talk about history and its critical interpretation. Mark doesn't know how much he's taught me in my life about how important brotherhood and sisterhood and love between people are to solidarity and intelligence. My life has brought me here, the privilege of becoming friends with our Cuban guests, who I'll introduce in a minute. Over a long period of time, they've taught me everything I know about Cuba. And when I went to Cuba, they were the most informed, critical, active, courageous voices in the defense of Black history and Afro-Cuban memory that I've ever met. I'm an historian, educated at Yale like Mark. I would never say anything about Cuban history without checking with them first. So we're very privileged to have them here. And we were just talking about the Haitian Revolution, about François Fanon. Remember, I'm French, we had a revolution too. Everybody talks about human rights, the abolition of slavery. Well, come on. We restored slavery, we betrayed Toussaint, we invaded Saint-Domingue, we colonized Africa and Asia. And Fanon knew what he was fighting against when he became one of the greatest thinkers of the century, as we think about his legacy here, and they've been thinking about him in Cuba as well. So the Cuban Revolution, we're here to celebrate the great tradition of internationalism, but we're also here, I hope, to create some momentum for some conversations, some work together, some raising of consciousness, and some building of bridges between Cuba and the United States, which is deeply necessary. So I'm very proud to teach at a historically Black university called Norfolk State University in Virginia. A few years ago, when I landed there, I began taking my students to Cuba for trips that lasted from 6 to 10 weeks for academic credit. Of course, you can imagine young African-American men and women from Virginia showing up in Cuba without anything more than my academic preparation, which is very modest, to understand that this is the country that was the longest lasting Spanish colony in the hemisphere and one of the largest recipients of African slaves. That the population there has got to be 2/3 of African descent, even though statistics, which are based on biological criteria and other BS, say otherwise. Dr. Fernandez Robina said in a forum at Norfolk State the other day, it was probably around 50%, but everybody has some African heritage. And we're here to talk about how the history of that heritage has been silenced. What else is new, right? But Cubans have been fighting for a voice for 2 centuries now. And right now in present-day Cuba, I just want to tell you, whatever the difficulties of everyday survival, of maintaining the revolution alive and being creative in this world, people down there are invested in amazing ways in the struggle for representation, against discrimination, for social justice and equality, and for the revival of the debate, the much squandered debate on the role of Africans and African-descended peoples in Cuban, Caribbean, Latin American, hemispheric, and world history. So it's a place where I have learned, I know you'll learn. What we're going to do today, I'm going to introduce each of them in a minute, and then it was Gloria Rolando, the documentary filmmaker, who has honored us with her presence today, who insisted that we see her film first, so that then we can have an informed discussion with our 3 guests on these issues. She authored a 3-part documentary on the commemoration of the centennial of the uprising and subsequent repression and massacre of the Independent Party of Color in 1912. We're going to show that second part on that event and its impact in Cuban history first. If later on you're interested enough, and enough people have lingered, we can show part 1, which is about the period leading up through the Independence War, the occupation, the formation of the party, and the development of all the contradictions in Republican Cuba. We can show that and have a conversation as well. The third is actually in production. But for those of you who don't know pre-revolutionary Cuban history, this is an event of the utmost importance. We're also celebrating the bicentennial of the uprising of Aponte in 1812, who was a mulatto-free artisan in Havana and a student of the Haitian Revolution, who left a book of notes and pictures in a diary talking about his interpretation of the events and their impact on world history in San-Domingue. He rose up, or led a movement in Havana and its environs that was interpreted later on as the first great uprising for independence and anti-slavery in Cuban history. What he was really celebrating, in my opinion, is Africanness in the Americas and the continuation of struggles for African freedom in the Americas. Cubans have also been commemorating that bicentennial. The rest of the history is more familiar. Cuba remained a colony until essentially 1902. It was the longest lasting colony other than Puerto Rico in the hemisphere. During that struggle in the 19th century, which lasted from 1868 to 1895, and the end of the Second War of Independence, great things happened and great people led the nation. But never forget, over 3/4 of the fighters of the Cuban Revolutionary Army were black. Most of the fighters in Cuban history, in all of its history, even colonial, were black. And yet, when the Republic was established after a 4-year American occupation, there was a serious issue, which I can summarize in 2 words that speak volumes, and that's Jim Crow. On the other hand, Cubans fought and conquered for universal male suffrage, which they got in 1902, so Afro-Cubans could vote. As they struggled to participate in the political process, form associations, create links with Booker T. Washington and his Tuskegee Institute, further the cause of black people on the island, tell the history of Cuba from the perspective of Afro-Cuban memory, little by little, due to the impositions of the American occupation, the Constitution, and the reality of the clientelistic and corrupt political system, blacks became more and more marginalized, more and more voiceless. They had a big debate among themselves that these experts will talk about what to do. One of the solutions, after a second occupation in 1906, was suggested by a veteran of the Cuban Independence War, General Estenos, and Pedro Ibonet. These people decided with others to form a party called the Independent Party of Color, which was an inclusive party, a party that wanted to carry the voice of colored people into the political process in Cuba, a party of professionals, middle-class citizens, men and women, that included whites and others, folks from the West Indian diaspora even. They just wanted to be present in national elections to carry a message. And with a long history of fear-mongering about what would happen if Cuba ever fell into the hands of black people, the Cuban Republic, and that story will be told by our guests, banned that party, which in Oriente, the majority Afro-Cuban area of the islands, went into the hills, joined with the peasantry, and fought an uprising for their right to representation, and only their right to representation. There was very little violence on the PIC side, but the response was swift and dramatic. Over 3,000 dead, an incredible massacre, including of all the leadership, their friends, their neighbors, their daughters, their sons, people walking down the street who were suspected of looking like them. And after that, race has been a difficult subject in Cuba to discuss at any level. Even after the revolution, as you all know, I'm not going to lecture you on that. I'm getting old, I'm 48 years old. I've been going to Cuba for over 25 years. What I've noticed over the past 20 years, and especially under the leadership of the people here present, the debate on race in Cuba is going full steam. And not just on racism and discrimination, but on how to develop an independent voice, Black consciousness movement, how to reunite with the sources that Mark Harding was talking about, the Caribbean heritage, the Latin American struggle, other nations, and how to bring that discussion to the fore publicly in Cuba and internationally in a progressive, internationalist, critical way, a responsible way. So that's what this is. I invited them as an act of reciprocity because of all the help they've given me in Cuba, myself and my students, to the United States. They're going on a tour, all of them. Roberto Zorbano is a resident at the Rifus Center in Connecticut, and the impact that they're having during this trip is tremendous. But the most important event to me and to my brothers and sisters on the trip was definitely this encounter at the Shabbat Center. So thank you once again. Before we start the film, I'm going to ask them to stand up as I introduce them. Gloria Rolando of the Cuban Film Institute. Stand up and introduce you. Roberto Zurbano, who is the director. Of the Casa de las Americas, again. And Tomás Fernando Urbana, the historian from the Cuban National Library. Gloria Rolando would like to say a few words before we show the film and begin the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you all of you to be here. This is an important presentation for me. I am really very nervous because I haven't seen many people that I know for a long time, and we didn't meet each other, so they are here. So a big kiss, a big hug for all of you. But I want to dedicate this presentation to the first person who brought me here to this country. When I met him the first time, I only had one film. Now I have 11 films, and he's here, Ben Jones, that I call Papa. I want to dedicate this presentation to him. We are really around the authority, and he was the first person who put me to work in all this history and showed me the history of Malcolm X and the common history that we have, Afro-Cubans and African-American. So for Joe Bailey, this is a tribute. And also, I want to say that this second chapter, you will see the images of Santiago de Cuba that suffered the Sandy consequence, the hurricane consequence. Even one of the members of the family of the General Pedro Piconet lose his house during this process. And one of the responsibilities that we have is also not only to talk about what happened in the United States, don't forget what happened in Cuba, that we are losing the most important Caribbean city that we have in Cuba, that is Santiago de Cuba. So the images that I would present in the film, it doesn't exist anymore. No tree in Santiago. So please don't forget that we are brothers and sisters, and we need all your support. Thank you very much. Party was legalized, how they continue until 1912 when happened the massacre. So, do you want to make any comment, critics, anything that you want, please?
Let's have a little break for a minute.
Okay,
Let's have a break. You know, this is a phenomenal film, so let's take a 5-minute break and then come back to the film.
Perdone que no hablo español.
Because my English.
No se oye.
My English. Okay.
No, puedes subirlo nada más. Súbelo un poquito para que coja. A ver, ahora. Ah, perfecto.
I see.
Coge.
Mira, a ver, haz un texto.
Coge esto y yo cojo. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Excuse me that I don't speak English.
Yeah.
My Spanish, my English is really bad.
Perdón que no hablo inglés porque mi inglés está mal.
Bueno. Bueno, en primer lugar, agradecer la presencia de todos ustedes.
In the first place, to be in the presence of all of you,
Y la gran posibilidad, gran honor de estar en este lugar.
and the great opportunity to be in this place, in this location.
Yo creo que es un momento muy bueno
I think it is a very important and good moment
para el intercambio sobre la problemática racial en Cuba
for an exchange about the racial dynamics in Cuba
con hermanos de otros lugares,
with brothers and sisters of other places,
especialmente con afroamericanos
especially with African Americans and with many Afro-Latinos
que hacen un puente entre las dos realidades.
who create this bridge between the two realities that we have.
En Cuba, primero voy a hablar de mi trabajo.
In Cuba, I'm going to first speak of the work that I do.
Yo trabajo en la Casa de las Américas hace 6 años,
I work in a center called Casa de las Américas, House of the Americas,
una de las primeras instituciones culturales de la revolución,
which is one of the first cultural institutions of the revolution,
hecha para fomentar un puente cultural entre Cuba y toda América y las Américas y el Caribe.
which was created to create a bridge, between Cuba and the rest of the Americas.
Recuerden que Cuba no tenía relaciones diplomáticas,
If you recall, Cuba did not have many diplomatic relationships,
excepto México y Jamaica.
except for Mexico and Jamaica.
Todos los países rompieron relaciones con la revolución cubana.
Every nation broke the ties that they had with the Cuban nation.
Y esa institución se convirtió en una especie de cancillería.
And that institution created a sort of chancellery
A través de las relaciones culturales,
through cultural arts.
intelectuales, artistas y periodistas de toda la región.
Artists, journalists, and many different people who work in the art world from the region.
Y también esa institución ha sido fundamental
And that institution has very fundamental
para entender el concepto del latinoamericanismo,
to understand the concept of Latin Americanism,
que hasta los primeros años 60 se hablaba de hispanismo,
that through the 1960s was spoken of,
se hablaba de hispanismo.
was spoken more of a Hispanicism.
Creo que la revolución cubana sirvió para entender,
But what the Cuban Revolution worked was to understand
para abrir muchos centros de estudios en Europa y Estados Unidos,
and to open different centers of study in the US and in Europe
para estudiar América Latina,
to study about Latin America,
pero contando a los latinoamericanos
but telling it from the point of view of Latin
y
Americans
los caribeños.
and people of the Caribbean.
Esta es una institución que ha sido muy importante.
This is an institution that has been very important.
Llevo poco tiempo allí, solo 6 años,
I've only been there 6 years,
pero descubrí que en el catálogo editorial
but I discovered that in the editorial catalog
de unos 900 títulos muy importantes,
of about 900 important titles,
faltaban títulos básicos,
that there were some basic titles that were missing.
como Jacobinos Negros, Jacobinos, Black Jacobins,
Like the Black Jacobins.
y pude hacer una edición
And
cubana.
I was able to make a Cuban edition.
También en los 50 años de la muerte de Fano,
Also, after 50 years of Franz Fanon's death,
pudimos hacer una nueva edición de Los Convidados de la Tierra.
we were able to make a new edition of The Wretched of the Earth.
Hemos estado publicando en Williams,
We've been
Eric Williams.
we've been working with Eric Williams and working on the works of Eric Williams
a un importante grupo de autores haitianos,
in a very important group of writers, of Haitian writers,
y hemos tratado de identificar desde allí
and we have tried to identify from that point, from there,
una línea de trabajo que no sé por qué la Casa de las Américas no tenía,
a line of work that we don't understand why the House of the Americas did not focus on.
que era la presencia negra en toda América Latina
That it was the black presence in all of Latin America
y también América del Norte.
and also in North America.
No hablo solo de Estados Unidos,
I'm not only speaking of the United States,
en Canadá
also in Canada.
realmente hay grandes colonias
There are great colonies
de caribeños y centroamericanos
of Caribbeans and Central Americans
que son un núcleo muy fuerte.
who are very strong.
Pero también me ha interesado mucho
But it has interested me very much
como editor,
as an editor,
no solo de libros,
not only of books,
porque yo soy el director del Fondo Editorial de la Casa de las Américas,
because I'm part of the editorial side of the House of the Americas,
pero yo soy un revistero, a mí me gustan las revistas.
but I like magazines. I'm a magaziner.
y he atravesado muchas revistas en Cuba.
And I have traveled and I have seen many actually magazines in Cuba.
Y siempre me gusta marcar las problemáticas raciales en las revistas.
And I always like to mark the racial problematics that you see in magazines.
Las revistas tienen otra dinámica.
Magazines have another entire other dynamic.
Los temas entran por la puerta, por la ventana, por el fondo.
The themes come through the door, through the window, through the bases.
Uno conoce a muchos autores,
One knows, they don't know many authors.
lenguajes, temas,
Language, themes,
discusiones,
discussions.
que en un libro están ya más asentadas,
In a book, they're more settled.
son más formales.
They're they're formalized.
Confieso que editar libros a mí me aburre un poco,
I just want to be honest and tell you that editing books is very boring to me.
pero me divierte mucho hacer revistas.
But I enjoy editing the magazines.
Fundé la revista de antropología cubana en la Fundación Fernando
I
Ortiz.
founded a magazine that focuses on Cuban anthropology.
Fundé una revista digital en la Unión de Escritores La Isla del Beso.
I founded another magazine,
La Isla del Beso.
the weight of the island.
Sustituí como segundo director a Daniel Fernández de la revista cubana Hip Hop.
I was the second one who followed up on a magazine that focuses on Cuban hip hop.
Tuve unos 5 años con la revista de rap.
I focused about 5 years with a magazine that focuses on Cuban hip hop.
Preparé un número especial de la Gaceta de la Unión,
I worked on a special edition of
de la Unión de Escritores, la Gaceta.
The National Union of Cuban Writers and Artists.
the National Union of Cuban Writers and Artists.
Que se llama Cultura, Raza y Nación,
And it's called Culture, Race, and Nation.
que salió en enero de 2005.
That came out in January of 2005.
Y estuve 2 años preparando,
And I was 2 years preparing.
no porque me faltaran los textos,
Not because the texts were missing,
sino porque había mucha resistencia.
but because there was a lot of resistance.
Y logramos hacer ese número.
And we were able to make this effort.
Yo mismo busqué el dinero,
I looked for the money on my own.
una mayor cantidad de páginas,
I wrote most of the pages.
se demoraba esa colaboración,
And so the publication delayed a long time,
pero salió.
but it came out.
No voy a contar cómo porque es muy largo.
I'm not going to tell you how it came out because that'll be too long.
Hace poco pude hacer un número especial de la revista Casa de las Américas
Recently, we were able to make a special edition of the magazine of the House of the Americas
sobre la presencia negra en las Américas,
about the black presence in the Americas,
empezando por Canadá
starting in Canada
hasta la Tierra del Fuego.
and all the way to the land of fire. It
Ahí
came to them.
ahí se habla de los yuncas en Brasil,
We talk about
perdón, en Bolivia.
We talk about the Yuncas in Bolivia.
Se habla de lo que sucede con los negros en Argentina,
We talk about what happens with blacks in
en
Argentina,
México.
in Mexico.
En aquellos lugares
In those places
no tan destacados por su población negra,
that are not as distinguished for their black population,
como Colombia o Brasil,
like Colombia or Brazil,
no insistiendo tanto en el Caribe,
not insisting so much on the Caribbean,
porque si al Caribe le quitamos a los negros, no hay Caribe.
because if we talk about blacks in the Caribbean, there's no Caribbean.
Y en este número de la revista Casa de las Américas,
And in this issue of the House of the Americas,
hay textos sobre la música,
there are texts about music,
sobre el pensamiento negro, la política
about
negra,
black thought and black politics,
sobre la literatura,
over black literature.
sobre Obama también, sobre Obama.
Also about Obama.
Hay un mapa de los movimientos negros
There's a map of black movements
en América Latina
in Latin America,
y hay varios temas
and there are many themes
que me parecen que son muy interesantes,
that are very interesting to me,
aunque sé que se quedaron muchas cosas fuera.
even though I know that some things were left out.
Ese ha sido, bueno, mi trabajo en los últimos tiempos.
That has been my work for the most recent times.
Mi obra quizás la he descuidado un poco,
My work maybe I've not taken care of it as much,
pero me ocupo esencialmente de literatura
but I focus mostly in literature
y de una zona de las músicas alternativas en Cuba.
and a zone of alternative music in Cuba.
Raza, literatura y nación,
Race, literature, and nation.
que es el triángulo invisible del siglo XXI.
That is the invisible triangle of Cuba's 20th century.
Es un libro que trato de terminar hace 5 o 6 años.
It's a book that I'm trying to finish now 5 to 6 years.
Y fuera del club, es otro libro.
And the other book,
Fuera del club,
outside of the club,
un mapa de la nación hip hop en Cuba.
which is a map of Cuba's hip hop nation,
Es también otra de mis preocupaciones.
is another one of my labors of my works.
A partir de un show de radio que yo tenía en La Habana,
Through this radio program that I had
que duró como 5 años y pico,
that lasted about 5+ years,
y me dio la posibilidad de trabajar mucho estas músicas alternativas
it gave me the opportunity to work through these alternative music,
y trabajar con muchos productores independientes de hip hop,
to work with many different producers of hip hop,
de rock,
of rock,
de otras músicas
other
alternativas en Cuba,
other alternative music styles in Cuba,
y tener una dimensión que no solamente saber que no solo se habla de música,
and to have a dimension that we're not only speaking about music,
sino de historia, de política,
but we're
de
talking
todo.
about history and politics.
Y yo quería mucho ese show,
And so I really liked that show,
pero tenía mucho trabajo.
but it was a lot of work.
Tuve que dejarlo cuando entré a la Casa de las
I
Américas.
had to leave it when I entered my job at the House of the Americas.
Aunque me he mantenido haciendo una columna de crítica de libros en la televisión.
Even though I've been doing a critique of certain books on TV.
Yo creo que he tenido ese privilegio
I believe that I've had that privilege,
y ese privilegio lo he convertido en una tribuna
and that privilege I've turned it
para otras personas,
into a stage for other people,
para la gente que viene detrás de mí
for other people who are coming behind me,
y que ha estado delante en el tiempo luchando
and that have been fighting. I've been fighting for a long time ahead
contra el racismo.
against racism,
Y sé que es una lucha difícil
and I know that it is a very difficult struggle.
de todos los días
It's an everyday struggle,
y hasta la muerte. Y hasta la muerte.
and unto death.
Eso lo sabe una persona que ha estado acostumbrado a trabajar siempre entre personas blancas.
Someone who says that knows because they've been working amongst a group of white people,
En instituciones demasiado blancas,
or institutions that are very racialized, that are very white.
donde aunque uno se gane el respeto,
That although one gains the respect,
hay que conquistarlo todos los días.
we have to conquer that every day.
Porque uno siente a veces que no nos quieren,
Because sometimes we feel that we're not wanted,
pero uno sabe lo que quiere.
but we know what we want.
Y eso es suficiente a veces
And that's enough sometimes
para abrir un camino
to open up a path
por donde mucha gente que no ha podido llegar hasta donde ha podido llegar
through which many people can get to the places where I've been,
puedan pasar.
can get to those places.
Y yo creo que esa vocación de servicio
And I think that in that vocational service,
es una condición familiar.
it's a work of the family.
Tiene que ver con lo que sucede en mi familia desde niño.
It happens with what happens it came from what happened to my family as a child.
Tengo tíos músicos que les gustaba divertir a los demás.
I have an uncle who liked to entertain everyone.
Tengo tías que cocinan muy bien, que le encanta que la gente vaya a su casa.
I have aunts who like to cook well and who like to invite people over to eat their food. I know it's very good.
Tomasito lo sabe.
Tomasito has been there.
Y hay una vocación de servir a los demás,
And there's a vocation of serving others,
porque la salvación no es personal.
because salvation is not a personal endeavor.
Como dice cierto pensamiento francés, o no sé.
Like some French thoughts say.
Y es una forma de vivir.
And it's a way of uniting.
Es también una forma de luchar,
It's a way of fighting,
de vivir con orgullo, con dignidad.
of living with dignity and with pride.
Y en el espacio de la cultura que me encuentro.
And in the space of culture, in the cultural space sphere where I'm at.
Estoy consciente que es un espacio muy politizado
I am aware that it's a space that is very politicized.
y que a veces me usan porque soy el único negro que está ahí.
And that sometimes I'm used because I'm the only black person.
Yo los uso a ellos.
But I also use them.
Y mi bandera
And my flag
es la negociación
is negotiation,
hacia adelante.
to move forward.
El paso que se conquista,
The step that is conquered,
no hay vuelta atrás.
it does not go back.
Aunque muchos hermanos se cansan,
Although many brothers and sisters may get tired,
o que muchos hermanos no entienden,
or many brothers and sisters don't understand,
o no puedan
they can't.
hacerlo. Todo eso hay que entenderlo. Yo creo que las publicaciones en Cuba
I believe that the publications in Cuba
sobre los temas raciales en los últimos 10 años
over themes about race over the last 10 years
han crecido muchísimo.
have grown extensively.
Pero lo que más me alegra
But what brings me the most joy
que lo que más ha crecido en Cuba también
that what has most happened in Cuba also
es la conciencia racial de una comunidad negra,
is of a black consciousness of the black community,
no solo integrada por negros,
not only made up of blacks,
porque se comparten muchos espacios comunes,
because we share a lot of cultural spaces,
blancos, negros y mestizos,
whites, blacks, and mestizos,
el espacio de la religiosidad,
the space of religiosity,
el de la pobreza,
of poverty,
el de la cultura,
of culture,
que son importantes espacios de comunión y de lucha.
that they're important steps of work in fighting.
Pero eso se ha venido organizando en los últimos 5 años.
But that has started to be organized the last 5 years.
Ya aparecen varias organizaciones
And many different organizations appear
con plataformas ciudadanas,
with a civil platform,
plataformas políticas,
with a political platform,
fraternales,
with a brotherly platform,
religiosas,
religious platform,
comunitarias,
community platform,
que se van empoderando,
that start empowering themselves,
asumiendo una conciencia racial
start taking conscience of racial issues,
y enseñándolos a la gente más joven.
and teach that to the younger people.
Y hay un movimiento emergente,
And there's an emerging movement.
todavía fragmentado,
It's still fragmented.
todavía sin la suficiente organización,
It still does not have the necessary organizations.
sin la suficiente puesta de acuerdo a lo que estamos de acuerdo,
It doesn't have the agreements that of all the things that we need to be in agreement about.
con muchas contradicciones entre nosotros
With a
todavía.
lot of contradictions amongst one another.
Falta de establecer alianzas con otras comunidades
We haven't been able to make alliances with other communities
que han logrado cosas
that have spoken things,
en la lucha en Cuba,
especially in the fight in
la
Cuba,
lucha por la ciudadanía,
the fight for citizenship.
que son espacios, digamos, los espacios de los homosexuales,
This is the space of the
los
homosexuals,
espacios del feminismo,
of feminism,
los espacios de los campesinos.
spaces of farm workers.
Faltan esas alianzas
We
todavía.
need to make those alliances. They're still
Faltan las
lacking.
alianzas con la diáspora.
There's lacking alliances with the diaspora.
Faltan también muchos recursos,
We're lacking a lot of resources.
pero están apareciendo muchas ideas,
But there are a lot of ideas that are coming.
muchos debates,
There are a lot of debates.
muchas discusiones que no están en ninguna revista todavía,
Many discussions that are not in any magazine right now.
no están en internet todavía,
They're not in the internet right now.
pero están en la realidad cubana,
But they're in Cuba.
en espacios muy pequeños,
In small spaces, in very small spaces.
pero que están creciendo hacia abajo,
But that they're growing.
en profundidad de pensamiento
They're growing in their profoundness of their thought.
y con la posibilidad, creo yo,
And with the possibility, I believe,
de reconstruir un país
of reconstructing a nation
al que los negros han entregado todo
in which the blacks have given everything.
y han construido no solamente las grandes mansiones y las calles,
And we have not only built the big houses, the big mansions on the streets,
sino la cultura moral del país,
but also the moral fiber of the nation,
la cultura musical y danzaria,
the music, the dance,
pero también las prácticas
but
políticas
also the political practices of the nation.
y tener esa conciencia
And having that conscience
es una conquista muy grande
is a very big conquest
de los últimos 10 años.
of the last 10 years.
Finalmente yo quería reconocer
Lastly, I wanted to recognize
que el movimiento hip hop en Cuba,
that the hip hop movement in Cuba,
que se ha movido entre los 90 hasta hoy,
that has moved from the 90s until the present day,
fueron los primeros que comenzaron a decir todas estas cosas
were the first ones to start making all of this, taking notice to all this,
en voz alta,
in a loud voice,
a organizar un discurso diferente.
organizing a different discourse.
Los demás discursos
The other discourses
que son organizaciones que fracasaron en el camino
that were of organizations that failed on their path,
y que gracias a todos los nichos mantenemos grandes cabezas todavía.
and that thankfully, thanks to all the Orishas, we have great heads still ahead of us.
Maestros nuestros como el propio Tomasito
Teachers of ours like Tomasito,
y otros muchos.
and other many people.
Pero los raperos cubanos
But the Cuban rappers
llevaron todo eso a la calle,
have taken all of that to the streets,
a las nuevas generaciones,
to the new generations,
a gritarlo en la plaza pública.
to the public plaza.
Y esto es un proceso que hay que reconocer.
And this is a process that we must
La
recognize.
fuerza de una cultura nueva
The force, the strength of a new culture,
y de las políticas culturales
And of
desde la propia gente joven,
and of the cultural politics from young people,
con un discurso contrahegemónico,
with a discourse against hegemony,
un discurso por un nuevo país,
a discourse for a new nation.
Nos ha llevado a otra dimensión de la
It
lucha.
has taken us to another dimension of this struggle.
Ahora mismo estamos en otro momento
Right now we're in different moments
y
now,
hay que saber aprovecharlo bien.
and we have to know how to make sure that everything works for well.
Tenemos muchos peligros también. Tenemos muchos peligros,
We have a lot of dangers ahead,
pero yo creo que lo sabemos
but I believe that we know that,
y esperamos que seamos más en ese camino,
and we hope that there are many more of us on this path,
dentro y fuera de Cuba.
within and outside of Cuba.
Gracias.
Thank you.
So, I don't know why everybody in Cuba want to feel that I am an old man. And I have the same worries, the same expectation of the young people, of the people that belong to the hip hop movement. I appreciate a lot the hip hop movement, because the hip hop movement could expand the idea of a black consciousness, something that the old black Cuban social movement hasn't been able to expand in the same way. We had a very outstanding black Cuban intellectuals like Gustavo Urrutia, that is one of the wise really of the black Cuban community, and all the people that speak about blacks in Cuba never made a quotation of Gustavo Urrutia's song, and no mention Juan René Betancourt, no mention Walter Carbonet. And really, I am very optimistic, I am very romantic, I am a utopic man. I believe that a better world can be constructed if we all work together. And putting away of our souls all the bad thinkings, the violence, the hate, because those who cultivate hate and violence provoke hate and violence. And we have, knowing that we have a lot of enemies, to change, to be different, because we need to show the people, the community, that have been persecuted, that have been discriminated by any kind of reason, we are a better human being than those that have punishment historically to us. If we don't know how to forgive, if we don't know how to appreciate, that with love is the only thing that we can create that society that we want. Of course, that is very difficult, because despite the fact of what I am saying, I am a very violent man. Because one thing is to say theory, and the other thing is to know the practice. That when you go into a place and you're not allowed because any kind of discrimination, that is very hard. Really, 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 really. And I want to say to you that my brother, I am very happy to be here sharing some of my ideas with the brother Sulbano, that despite the fact that really I am older than him, I have learned a lot. Because when a person thinks that because he's old and that he has written too much or has spoken too much, he knows everything, he's completely lost. So I am always learning from the youth, from everybody, because you can receive a lesson from the person that you less expected that will be your teacher, your master. It is very important for me because at the same time, I want to thank, because why? I was a person that never thought to come to the United States. I have been, and I am a very anti-imperialistic person. However, what happened to me when I began to meet American people, African American people, and let me tell you that I thank a lot because I have increased my black consciousness because of my African American brothers and sisters. I want to remember to Santa Fanny Roshi from Chicago, that she was the one that said to me, it was in some way funny, because she said to me when we met in Havana, oh, I think that we met once in LA in a congress, and I smiled. And I said, me in LA? Oh, no, impossible, I haven't even been abroad. I said, but how is it possible that you haven't been abroad? You have my first book was Secret Memoir of Two Poor Women about the Cuban prostitution. And the second was Black in Cuba, Fight Against Black Discrimination. And I said, well, yeah, I have published these two books, but I haven't been invited to any. And she said, I will organize a trip to you. And thanks to her, and thanks to my other brother, great brother, Ben Jones, that really is and our friendship has not been easy, because sometimes he said something to me, because you know, you Americans sometimes, there is something of the personality of you American, black or white, that you know everything, and that you know all the things, and so even in Cuba, some Americans used to say to me, no, you are wrong, the solution is this. And I said, but please, I live in the island, how are you going to tell me how our solution has to be? And sometimes we have thought, oh, this American is a member of the Cuban security. Because they don't, the American people that support the Cuban Revolution never admit the mistake that we have had. And the first thing that we have to accept is that we have a mistake. Because a revolution cannot be a revolution if the revolution has no mistake. And that's what I'm talking about. To be very clear, very clear. Second point, the wonderful thing, and that is why I'm so happy, like what my brother used to say here now at this moment, because we are in a very special moment in our country. Because never before we were able to speak openly about all the things that we are speaking, and only speaking, because for speaking is nothing. It's that not only to speak it, to force, to push the things to better our society. Like you have to better our society, we Cubans, in our way, try to better our society. And that is very important. And things that were wrong now, for instance, to speak about gay homosexual in Cuba, please, that was almost impossible. To speak about the race debate in Cuba, oh, you can imagine how many problems they have to face. But when you believe in something, and the most important thing that we have to be to get or to have is believe in what we say. Believe in what we think, believe secretly in what we are fighting for. That is very important. It's the only way to continue the fight and to see the final thing in some aspects. A revolution is a process. The fight against racism in Cuba is a process. It's impossible that we can erase of the mind of the Cuban people black and white racist ideas. Because our problem is not only among the blacks, it's among the blacks and among the whites. Because the fight has to be together. What do we do if we get the consciousness of the black people? Okay, we are black, we have the consciousness of the black beauty, or the black cause, or ethnic black cause. And we can have it in our community, but we live in a society. We share the society with Chinese, with white people. So we have to try that the other people get the knowledge of the consciousness. And that is why I'm so happy with the hip hop movement. And I want to thank to my dear friend, and we have had also like a good friend, we have a lot of problems, because in 2002, I gave a course, history, Cuban history, at the National Library. That is where I work. I don't work at the National Archives. I work at the National Library. I am librarian, and I feel very, very, very proud of being librarian, because if I wouldn't have been librarian, I wouldn't have been able to write all these history books, anthropology books that I have written. And people say to me, no, but you're a historian. No, I am not a historian. I am a person involved with the civil fight in my country for the rights of all the people, the gay, the women, the religious people, the black people. And that is why I write about that, because I am worried about that. Because sometimes, and I write because if I don't write, I would die. Because it's something like when you have a stomach or a bad digestion, and then you know, wow, you know what happens. And that is why I write. I don't write the pleasure for writing beautiful things. I will try, as a writer, try to do it the best way. And there is one example of my last book, MASSACRE, written in honor of one of my great brothers, that was Reinaldo Arinas. I don't know if you know about him, you know. And I wrote that book, MASSACRE, something like that. If I read it right, I don't know what will happen to me. And that is why I write about the black problem, the gay problem. I am considered by a historian, a very important historian in Cuba, Jorge Ibarra, like, I don't know how to say that in English. Please, the translator, el francotirador. El francotirador, he wrote in one of his books dedicated to me, to Tomasito, always Babylon, the francotirador, sharpshooter of the Cuban history. Because I always focus on those areas where people have not paid attention. And because of that is that I have my first book, Secret Memoirs of Two Poor Women. It's about the prostitution before the revolution, but at the same time I wrote that because I said before that I am very realistic, very romantic, and I am one of those that believe that the literature, that the art can help in the development of the society. So what I did, I wrote this book calling the attention that the prostitution was really all in Havana in those years. The second book was Blacks in Cuba, the fight against racism during the Republic. It lasted 10 years to be published. I finished in 1979, and it could not be published until 1990. Later, I had written before, Top Paleros and Santeros, because I wanted to share the feeling of those who practice the African religiosity in Cuba, living in a socialist country with codes that were completely against any kind of beliefs. After that, and that book, Topalero Santero, has been has 5 editions. The last one was in 2008. Later, I published again Secret Memoirs of Poor Women, that with a new title because I include new chapters, the history of poor women, because I showed really how the prostitution were already in Cuba, in the socialist countries, despite the fact of all the fight against prostitution before. In 2001, I published a book that was the history of the National Library, the place where I have been working up to date. So I am almost 72, or 71, exactly 71, and I have been working at the National Library 50 years. So, and as a result of my stay, of my life That has not been easy, but it has been happy, because we must remember always our life, the things that help us to develop as a human being, and not to say all the bad things that we have been able to suffer because of many other reasons. And recently, I published a book that was Cuba, Personalities in the Race Debate. I wrote that book, and I was teaching in a course about the slavery, black trade, and diaspora in Nigeria, at the University of Port Harcourt in Nigeria, in the area of the Igbo part of Nigeria. And that was published, it really was very successful. After that, I published African Identity, Culture and Nationality, that has been also very successful. After that, I published Master and Angel, the book where I wrote about Reynaldo Arenas, despite the fact of all the awful things that he said against all the Cubans that were his friends and that he met in Cuba. I am one of the characters that appear. I won't tell who am I, but please, if you read, try to guess who am I in that way. And so many people say to me, you should have write that book in the same way that he wrote his. And I said, no, because I cannot be at the same level of he did. Because if I wrote the book in the same level of hate, of envy, of all the awful things that he wrote against all the Cuban society, I would not be the person that I want to be. I don't know if I will be able to reach to that level, but I try. And the end is the title is Biography, Critics and Society. That is all the articles that I published since 1970 up to 2004. Articles that deal with the black race, that deal with all the problems of the librarian, comments about the bibliographical repertoire. But in this moment, I am very involved, like my brother used to say before, in the fight against racism. I belong to an organization whose title is Cofradía de la Negritud. Cofradía de la Negritud. At the head of the Cofradía is an engineer whose name is Norberto Mesa. And really, we try and we make meetings mostly where we share all these ideas in order to show how advanced is the fight against racism in my country. And it is very important that you know that in this moment the fight against racism in my country is very strong, and not only the fact that we are getting the possibility of expanding this battle, and no, the other day I had an informal meeting, and we know that we are going to have an event. I don't know if New York or Washington, with the black problems to show the presence of the Afro-Latin American problems in the advanced countries. And that is very important. And the Fed Secretary of the Cuban office in Washington said that because I was here, because she was the one that was to participate in the panel, and she said that because I was here, she would prefer that I would occupy her place. And I said, no. We have demanded, and the Partido Independiente de Color, since 1908 that was founded, demanded the presence of the black Cuban people in the diplomatic sector. So you are the first secretary of the Cuban ambassador in this country. You have to be the panel because we have to show that things are changing in my country. I don't know how will be the end, but the fact that the first secretary of the Cuban mission or the Cuban office section in Washington is a black to me is very important. So please, you have to be the panel to show that Cuban government is changing its policy. And she said to me, well, I would like that you chair with me the panel. And really, that was very important. And as you know, they passed me a note, as you say, I mean, I don't say lie. I say, I don't know how to begin, but I don't know how to stop. So I know they passed me a note.
And now, the artist that you've all been waiting for, you know, as soon as she realized that all these men were going to speak before her, she took off and had lunch. But Gloria Rolando is back. Thank you.
What I would like to do is to establish a dialogue. I don't like to talk too much. I think that I try to say many things through my film. But for example, I am very interested to know Ariel's opinion, Ben Jones' opinion, and many of you. Ariel, because I know that he was very related with the hip-hop movement and how I use the music. It was very important to give voices to the young generation, not only the old historians, through the music, through the interviews that I start with a young voice. I try to put, you know, the interest of the young people. So Ariel, por favor, you have the word, no me.
You want to get me in trouble?
It doesn't matter, we will fight.
I need to say something?
Yes, I am waiting. This is a dialogue.
Thank you everybody to be here. Thank you Gloria and Subano and Tomasito for being here representing the struggle within the revolution for black justice. I left Cuba 7 years ago. And one of the reasons why I left Cuba was because I was really passionate about all the work that needs to be done within the revolution by the recognition of blacks in the history of Cuba. And I realized that there were certain limitations and how I wanted to see the change happen in Cuba. I think Subano really explained really well that he understands that some people decide to keep going, some people decide to stop.
I want to say something.
I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago. I was at a Afro-Latino conference.
You have to speak loudly.
About 2 or 3 years ago, I think I was at an Afro-Latino conference. Sorry. And Ariel was there, and he was talking about the racism in Cuba. And you know how you grow at different levels, you're at different levels. I'm a socialist. I support the Cuban Revolution fully. But I wasn't ready to hear some of the things that he was saying that was right in terms of racism in Cuba, because I was looking at the fact that in Cuba people can get free education, get free health care, that you're never going to get in this country. You're never going to get it in this country, you know? So I thank Gloria for the film, and I thank Ariel for speaking today, because when I first heard about this conference or this meeting today, I said, this is really historic.
They closed all the black society. Cuba was a social structure where we have black society, white society, and even between the black society you have for mulattoes, for black people, for those who were like the black bourgeoisie or those who used to work, clean the house, working class people. I think that the main thing that the revolution tried to eliminate was this kind of difference. But it's true that they closed this place. Some of the archives were destroyed or disconnected to the people. And I realized that it was a big mistake. So, of course, I didn't know anything about this until I grew up, because I was 6 years and a half when the revolution arrived. But it is part of our memory. And actually, the only black society that exists in Cuba is the Caribbean Association. There is one in Havana, and it's the result of the people who migrate from Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Panama, that arrived to Cuba at the beginning of the 20th century. There is another group in Ciego de Ávila related with the West Indian community. And there is also an important society that is called the West Indian Welfare Center in Guantanamo. Because after they migrated to Cuba, during the Second World War, they migrated inside Cuba for Guantanamo, and they created this kind of association. But it's true that the two black associations, the West Indian Welfare Center and the Caribbean Association, they didn't have the best position economically, because I visited them. And it's true that they don't have the same kind of support. And for example, in front of the Capitolio, you could see the Asturiano, la Sociedad Asturiana, that exactly this year is 100 years of commemoration. And how much money they have, because they have a restaurant, they are making money. For that reason, they can support the cultural projects that they develop. And of course, some blacks also attend there, because if they are good people, they can be admitted. But it's true that we don't have this kind of society. So I think that we are now in the situation, the position, the level of the revolution, the level of the human history is in the necessity to think about that again. And for example, recently, the black women, we saw for the first time a book dedicated to black women that is, the name is Afro-Cubanas. And we are doing our own group of Afro-Cubanas, and we are working little by little in the foundation of this group. Because it's true that when you are pregnant and you go to a hospital and you have to have your baby, they don't separate, they don't segregate white women here, black women here. But maybe this black woman doesn't have the same condition of that, the same white woman. And I am talking about food, I am talking about clothes, and I am talking about support. And this is not a secret for anybody. So I think that we don't need to be scared to talk about this, because it's something that you could see in the street. I am an artist, but many of you know where I live. I belong to a very humble family. I live, in Centro Havana, in Havana Vieja, and I have seen the changes and the problems that we have. So for what reason we need to be scared to talk about black society in Cuba right now? I think that also many good patrons, models, examples could do through this kind of association. I don't know how we are going to fund it, but little by little, my generation have the responsibility, to create a condition and to say to many black people in Cuba that they don't profit about the benefit of the revolution, because you see them in the street wasting their time with the tourists when the schools are free. And I think that we need to talk more with the relatives, with the role of the family and everything, because not everything must be in the hands of the state. Black family need to get again the responsibility that they have with their child. And all of us, we have the responsibility to talk with the people, to talk, and for example, in my neighborhood, I knew since 1997 that I moved to Centro Havana, the barrio de Colón, I knew that any of these kids will arrive at the university, and I was right. It's sad, but I was right. Any of them arrive at the university. At the university, it's free for everybody. So the big question is why? Why? You know, so it's a big challenge. And I think that this is part of the struggle that we have. It's the struggle in the streets, the struggle in the school, it's the struggle in education.
Ok, gracias. Esta pregunta es para Gloria. Y es, durante el tiempo que usted tomó haciendo el documental, ¿supo cuánto de los miembros integrantes del Partido de Color habían sido veteranos de la guerra de independencia?
Many of the people who participated in the Party of Color were veterans from the Cuban Revolutionary War, the Liberation War.
Y la pregunta sería después de eso, si se ha tomado en consideración tomar esta información que usted está proveyendo para incluirla en las clases de historia en la enseñanza primaria.
And the question is if this information that you provided is going to be included in Cuban history classes in the curriculum in public school in Cuba.
But I'm going to let you respond to this first. Les voy a dejar responder a esta pregunta y después tomar otras de la sala. Gracias.
Empieza tú y después voy a...
When I get in touch with the newspaper, Previsión, the newspaper of the Independent Party of Color, there were many articles related that always start, we people who make possible, that participate, that we were good for the struggle, for the fight, and now in the Republic, they don't consider us. So that indicates me that the majority of them, they were veterans of the independence.
But you don't have the number?
No, I don't have the number in terms of members of the Independent Party of Color. But all the time they claim, you know, to have the recognition. Even the women who wrote for the newspaper Previsión, I realized that all the articles were related. We were present in the struggle for the independence of Cuba, so now we need to have the rights, we have the rights, we want everything as Cuban, no a peace, as an Afro-Cuban, so they mentioned Maceo, they mentioned Quintín Bandera, so I think that in the first chapter is more related with the struggle of the people in the 19th century. This one, you know, I start immediately to develop the program of the party, etc. But it looks like it was the majority of them. You know, because we are talking about the beginning of the 20th century. And all this struggle happened during 1868, the first war until 1878. After that, a short period of that, no opening a war, but they start again in 1895 and finish in 1896. So all this time, you know, it's people who grew up that were in the forest, that were working for the liberation of Cuba. They have the experience, directly, indirectly, you know. And the second question?
About the changes, if that information, like new information, like find out, and it's put into books and video, if finally got into the educational system in Cuba, that the people are...
I don't work for the Ministry of Education, I work in the CAI, but what are we doing? My proposal is not exactly to make money in Cuba with this film, is to spread the film, and we are doing this with hard drivers, with memorials, and people make copies, and I know that we want to spread the information like that. The first chapter, they showed it in the Cuban TV. They called me, it's very interesting, the history. They called me to show the film, the first chapter. The second one, no. Two things. I think that it's painful for many people that Martí's son was part of the group of officials, the military that went to Santiago to kill the independence. But I am talking about Martí's son, not about José Martí. You know, about Martí's son. And we are talking about men that belong to the Republic. And during the Republic, many of them who fought for the independence of Cuba, they have no new mentality. They want to take their part of the Republic. They haven't changed in the Republic. They play the game. And I think that José Martí's son, and I believe in José Martí because even the members of the Independent Party of Color, they believe in José Martí. Remember that I showed the newspaper and they have a phrase from José Martí, another from MASSACRE. So they believe in the ideas of José Martí. But José Martí's son was something different. But this is one of the mythics that we have in Cuba, and I was not scared. The second thing that in my opinion, they don't like is that attack the monument to José Miguel Gómez, and I use the rap. And many people, even the editor, that is why I said, Gloria, are you sure that you are going to use this? I don't care. I don't care. This is the rule. And also, it was the voice of the young generation, how they see, how could you say that we made a revolution? That we believe in all these beautiful ideas, and you don't put even una placa that says this is the president who killed the blacks in 1912. It doesn't mean that we need to demolish. No, it doesn't mean that. It's better that stay there and you have a recognition what kind of republic we have. But I think that we are scared. They are scared, not me. They are scared a little bit. And they showed it in the cinema festival, in some movies, but you know the power of the TV. The first chapter was shown in the round table, that is the most important political aspect for debate that we have in Cuba. They showed it, and the second one they talk about it, but they haven't shown. So we need to wait. But I promise you that the 3 chapters will be in the street. I don't care.
I will tell you something. All what we are doing, making visible all the hidden black history in Cuba, have the objective that our text, the text of historical text, can be changed. One of the demands of the Black Cuban movement is to change the program of our education, because don't forget that you, me, we have been educated in an Anglo-centric course imposed by the colonialism. Here, the British, in Cuba, the Spanish power. So that is very important. Because of that, it's so hard in my country and here too, but here you can speak openly against many things, because, for instance, the Partido Independiente de Color had been never included in the text. A student of history at the University of Havana, they don't know anything about the Partido Independiente de Color, and that is why I wrote my book, because Black in Cuba, the first title was Partido Independiente de Color, and I wrote in 1979. And when I made the research, I tried to make the analysis that you asked for. And to me it was impossible. I could make the analysis of the social classes according to all the documentation that I could consult in the National Archive. And for me, they belong to a small, middle, black social class. They were no people with so much money, they were no very outstanding intellectuals, because the black Cuban outstanding intellectuals, like Roberto Gómez and other people, could get position in the Senate, in the Congress. So, when you read, and I try to make that index, when I found the newspaper Previsión at the National Library in the 70s, I tried to make that analysis because it was very important for me to know how many have participated in the war. According to what they say and the publicity that they say that there were many colonel, general, etc., etc., etc. But I tried to check the names with all the registers of the people that belong to the army. But the fact, for me, is not so important that how many belong or not belong. The people that were at the top, they had been very outstanding heroes in the independent war. That is also very important. And there were many new young people, really many young people, because as she never mentioned Roots of My Heart, that was her first film about the Partido Independiente de Colón. And there, the story that is told have to relate like the young people go to join the army, and I mean the Partido Independiente de Colón, the uprising. And it is also very important that you know that the only who wrote an article supporting the uprising was Arturo Chombo. And I want to remember, I want to remember that I myself, and when I was thanking Father Roshin, and I was thanking my brother Ben Jones, I have to thank in big capital letters my thanks to Miriam Jimenez Rumani, to Diana Achata-Niebre, to my brother Steven, and Janet, and particularly to the center, because I have been collaborating to the center, to the Chombo Center, for more than 10 years. I only had to be there 5 hours a day, and then I stayed 8 and 9, almost when it was closing. And some people say, well, why? Instead of going out, I said, no, because I don't know how many times I will be able to go, and I learned a lot. I learned not only, and because the Chombo Center is an example of that kind of thing that we want to do, because there, I met many people from the Caribbean area. I met a person that I never will forget, because we debated a lot. How is the name of the Haitian? Andre was a Haitian exiled in this country that was fighting for politically for the right things in this country, and I learned a lot of him. So for that, I feel so. I mean, for me, the Chombo Center is like my national gallery in Cuba. The Chombo Center is my place that I have some family there too. Thank you.
Because everybody has been asking, in order to acquire Gloria's films, you should go to afrocubaweb.com. Look up Gloria Rolando on the page. All of her information is there. You can order the films, the previous films that she's made, and look out for the 3rd chapter of this film. Since there's no commercial circulation, that's important. So now we're going to let... Sorry?
Yo quiero hacer un comentario.
Okay. His magazine? Oh. No tienes revistas contigo. Again, we can get that stuff for you if you ask for it after the show, right? We let Roberto speak, and then we have a few other questions, but he would like to speak first.
Can I just borrow the mic?
Sí, hay 3 personas que quieren comentar. Antes o después? Okay. He would like to speak first, but you will get your chance in a minute. We have until 5, so please keep it brief.
I want to make 3 comments. And possibly that they're going to be short. And maybe they also serve as answers to some of the questions and comments posed. To some of the comments posed. The first is on Gloria's documentary. And the second one's about Fidel. And the third one's about the future. My comment on Gloria's film is that one of the most intense endeavors that we have to take up.
Que ha hecho un intelectual cubano.
That an intellectual has done.
Dentro de la historiografía cubana.
We're talking about Cuban historiography.
Por colocar este evento.
By putting this event.
En una lectura del presente.
In a lecture of the present.
Lo más importante son las preguntas que hace este documental.
The most important are the questions that this documentary makes.
Porque ese documental habla de la necesidad del Partido Independiente de color en aquella época.
Because the documentary states the importance and the need of the Independent Party of Color at that time.
Y la pregunta que me hace a mí ese documental.
And the question that it asks me, documentary asks me.
Es que si necesitamos ahora un Partido Independiente de color.
Is that do we need another Independent Party of Color right now in Cuba?
Y esa es una gran pregunta.
And that's a great question.
Que requiere el gran esfuerzo que ha hecho Gloria.
That requires all the endeavors that Gloria has done.
Mucho valor.
A lot of work.
Y mucha también seriedad profesional.
A lot of value and a lot of professional seriousness.
En el rigor de investigación.
When we talk about research.
De la documentación.
Of documentation.
Y de ir a buscar voces de otros historiadores.
And to search of other voices of other historiographers.
Que no solo historiadores habaneros.
Not only historians who are from La Habana.
Que cuentan una historia muy parecida a la de Miami.
That they tell the same story as those from Miami.
Yo creo que Gloria logró superar todas esas.
I believe that Gloria has been able to overcome all of those forts.
Y este documental es un modelo.
And this documentary is a model.
Para otros artistas intelectuales.
For other intellectual artists in Cuba.
Dos.
That's that. Two.
Fidel Castro.
On Fidel.
Yo creo que a nadie le queda duda que es un gran hombre.
I don't think that for anyone it's without a question that he's a great man.
Y que hizo una gran obra en la historia.
And that he has done great work over history.
Como todos los grandes hombres.
Like all great men.
Las cosas que hace bien.
The things that they do well.
Son inolvidables.
We can't forget those things.
Y los errores que cometen.
But the errors that they make.
Son del mismo tamaño de su grandeza.
Are of the same level of their greatness.
Esa también Fidel.
That's also Fidel.
Yo respeto mucho la obra de Fidel.
I respect the work of Fidel very much.
Aunque no siempre coincida con su pensamiento.
Even though it doesn't always go with his thought.
Y una de mis diferencias con Carlos Moore.
But one of my differences with Carlos Moore.
Que es también uno de los grandes pensadores de los conflictos raciales.
One of the great thinkers of racial conflicts in Latin America.
Pero tiene una gran obsesión.
But he has a great obsession.
Personal con Fidel.
Personal obsession with Fidel.
Hay que despersonalizar el problema racial en Cuba.
We have to depersonalize the racial problems in Cuba.
Porque Fidel también expresa un pensamiento de clase.
Because Fidel also expresses a thought of classes.
Un pensamiento de época.
A thought of his epoch, of his time.
Con sus limitaciones.
With his limitations.
Y yo prefiero pensar en sus virtudes.
And I prefer thinking of his virtues.
Y por el esfuerzo que hizo en los años finales.
And for the work that he did in the later years.
Por reconocer que hay racismo.
To recognize that there is racism in Cuba.
En algunos discursos que hizo en 2005.
In some of the speeches he gave in 2005.
En 2003, 2002.
2003, 2002.
Y crear un programa social.
And to create a social program.
Para resolver las desventajas sociales de la población negra.
To resolve all the social disadvantages of black population in Cuba.
Yo creo que ese programa tuvo errores.
I think that also had errors. That program had errors also.
Pero hasta ahí llegó su misión.
But that's where his mission went up to.
Yo creo que Fidel se defiende solo.
I think that Fidel defends himself.
O sea, como defenderá la historia.
Or history will defend him.
Pero es importante despersonalizar.
But it's very important to depersonalize.
El conflicto de la raza en Cuba.
The racial conflict in Cuba. Without
hablar.
Without speaking.
El pedazo de responsabilidad.
Of his shared responsibility.
Que él tuvo.
That he has.
En abrazar esa batalla.
That he has had to strike out the battle.
Dentro de Cuba.
Within Cuba.
Asumiendo una misión internacional.
By assuming an international mission.
Que yo creo que se ha hecho un gran reconocimiento.
That I think it's been greatly recognized.
Y yo creo que uno de los grandes reconocimientos ha sido el que hizo Nelson Mandela en Cuba.
And I think one of the great recognitions was what Nelson Mandela did in Cuba.
Ahí está esa obra de Fidel.
That's where the work of Fidel lies.
De manera que no voy a perder muchos segundos de defender.
So I'm not going to lose too many moments in defending Fidel.
Lo tercero es el futuro.
Thirdly is the future.
Yo acabo de escribir, quizás hace un año, un texto.
I wrote almost a year ago
un texto que se llama
a text that's called
Cuba 2012.
Cuba 2012.
12 dificultades
12 difficulties
para enfrentar
to confront
los neorracistas.
the neo-racists.
Son 12 puntos.
There are 12 points.
Que no puedo enumerar ahora todos de memoria.
And I'm not going to say them all right here out of memory.
Pero fue mi respuesta.
But it was my answer
a una extraña cábala que hay en la historia cubana.
To a hole that lacks in Cuban history.
Con el número 12.
With number 12.
El texto tiene 12 páginas.
The text has 12 pages.
Yo identifico 12 dificultades.
I identified 12 difficulties.
En 1812.
In 1812.
Asesinan los españoles.
They murdered the Spanish.
A José Antonio Aponte.
Spanish murders José Antonio Aponte.
Es la primera gran rebelión.
It's of the first great rebellion.
Por la independencia en Cuba.
For independence in Cuba.
No en 1868 como dice la historia.
Not in 1868 like Cuban history tells us, but in 1812.
Le cortaron la cabeza.
They cut his head.
Y la pusieron en un lugar público en La Habana.
And they put it on a pike and put it in a public square.
Hasta que se pudriera.
Until it rotted.
Y todavía hay una frase cubana.
And there's still a Cuban phrase today.
Que le dicen a los niños.
That they tell children all the time.
Tú eres más malo que Aponte.
You're worse than Aponte.
En 1912.
In 1912.
La masacre del Partido Independiente.
The massacre of the Independent Party of Color.
Y había algunos amigos negros en Cuba.
And there are some black friends in Cuba.
Por ejemplo, como el difunto Gualterio Cartonel.
Like the recently passed
Gualterio Cartonel.
O
Rogelio Martínez Furey, que decía,
who said,
tenemos que cuidar de los negros.
We have to take care of ourselves. Us black people have to take care of ourselves.
En el 2012.
In 2012.
Que nos toca otra vez.
Because it happened again.
Para exorcizar esos fantasmas.
So to exercise all those ghosts.
Yo escribí ese texto.
I wrote that text.
Cuba 2012.
Cuba 2012.
Y aquí hay mucho de estas cosas que se han conversado.
And there are many things in that text of what we've spoken about here.
El tema de la educación.
The theme of education.
¿Cómo insertar estos temas en la educación?
How to insert this in the curriculum in education.
No es por la propaganda política.
It's not for political propaganda.
Esto hay que organizarlo científicamente.
We have to organize this in a scientific manner.
Hay un grupo de pedagogos que ya hicieron la investigación.
There are teachers and different researchers that have done the research.
En todos los niveles de la educación.
In all levels of Cuban education.
Cuando no aparecen los hechos históricos en los medios.
When the occurrences of black people don't appear.
Cuando, por ejemplo, la figura de Antonio Maceo aparece blanqueada.
When the face of Antonio Maceo appears whitened.
Cuando no se habla de raza.
When we don't talk about race.
Hay que decir en biología que no existe la raza.
We have to say in biology that race doesn't exist.
Pero es una construcción histórica.
That is a historical construct.
Hay que llevar estos debates.
We have to take these debates
a los espacios sociales.
To the social spaces.
Hay que tener una organización
we have to have an organization of black people in Cuba.
Que no creo que sea ninguna de estas pequeñas organizaciones que hay.
That they shouldn't be small organizations of what we have now.
Esa es una de las cosas dificultades.
That's one of the 12 difficulties that we have.
Otra es la educación. La educación.
Another one is education.
La tercera es la conciencia racial.
The third one is racial consciousness.
Que no todos los negros la tienen.
That not all black people in Cuba have it.
Porque no se adquiere una conciencia social porque se nace negro.
Because you don't acquire racial consciousness just because you're born black.
La conciencia racial es una identidad política.
Racial consciousness is a political identity.
Y nace y crece.
It's born and grows
en un contexto social.
In a social context.
Que no ha sido el mejor.
That has not been the best.
Para los negros cubanos.
For black Cubans.
No siempre culpo a los negros cubanos que no tienen conciencia racial.
I don't always blame black Cubans for not having a racial consciousness.
Esta organización nueva
this new organization
es muy importante.
It's very important.
Recuerdo haber recibido muchas críticas sobre esto.
And I remember because I've received many criticisms over this.
De personas negras y blancas.
Of black and white people in Cuba.
Y fuera de Cuba también.
And outside of Cuba.
Pero esto no creo que sea un error.
But these are not errors. I'm not wrong.
Lo de la economía es muy importante.
What the issue of economy is very important.
Y no porque yo vaya a convertirme en capitalista.
And I'm not going to convert into a capitalist.
Pero
but
hay una desventaja económica muy grande.
There's an economical disadvantage, a huge economical disadvantage.
Comienza una etapa en la sociedad cubana
If you start in Cuban society,
donde el capital privado
there's a stage in Cuban society where private capital
que está entrando
that is entering
es para familias blancas,
is for white families,
en su mayoría.
in the most part, for the most part.
Y la cantidad de trabajadores que han quedado fuera,
And the many workers that have been left out,
hay una cantidad de blancos
there are a number of whites
que nos preocupa mucho.
that worries us.
Y hay que organizar esa demanda.
And we have to organize this demand.
El tema de los medios y de los
In the topic of media, is another.
radio, televisión, periódicos,
In radio, television, newspapers,
todavía tenemos una oportunidad,
we still have an opportunity there
porque estos medios son del Estado,
because the media is of the states.
son del gobierno de la revolución.
State control is controlled by the revolution.
Y yo tengo fe
And I have faith
en que se pueda
in that we can,
dar la batalla de todos esos medios,
and that we can start this battle within the media.
que es una batalla muy difícil,
It's a very difficult battle,
o una batalla donde muchos intelectuales negros
or it's a battle where many black intellectuals
piensan que ya está perdida.
think that is lost,
Yo creo que no es así.
but I don't think that's the case.
Es que estamos viviendo un nuevo momento
We're living in a new moment
donde hay que cambiar las estrategias,
where we have to change the strategy,
las propias tácticas de negociación,
the negotiational tactics,
y tenemos que tener una cantidad de profesionales
and we have to have a number of professionals
muy rigurosos en estas investigaciones.
who are very involved in this research.
Pero quiero decir también que ya todas las investigaciones están hechas.
But I want to say that